The massive alien ship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling cathedral, its obsidian hull reflecting the orange glow of sunset across the Pacific. Captain Elena Rodriguez watched from the bridge of the UES Horizon as the Zephyrian vessel settled into the designated landing zone outside New Geneva. After 3 months of tense negotiations through subspace communications, this would be humanity's first face-to-face contact with an alien species. Atmospheric readings are normal, Captain, reported Lieutenant Chen from the sensor station. The alien vessel is maintaining standard atmospheric pressure and composition within the meeting zone. Elena nodded, adjusting her dress uniform one final time. As Earth's chief diplomatic officer for first contact protocols, she carried the weight of representing all humanity on her shoulders. The Zephyrians had been surprisingly accommodating in their communications, agreeing to meet on neutral ground, using a shared atmospheric bubble. What concerned her was their repeated emphasis on demonstrating their superiority and natural dominance over what they called lesser species. The transport shuttle touched down gently on the prepared landing pad. Elena stepped out alongside her team. Dr. Sarah Kim, the xenobiologist, Commander James Park, head of security, and most importantly, 12-year-old Tommy Martinez, the son of one of the diplomatic staff who had specifically requested to attend. Tommy's parents had died in the mining accident on Europa 2 years ago, and he'd been living with the diplomatic corps ever since. Despite regulations, Elena had allowed him to come after he'd pleaded that this might be his only chance to see real aliens. The boy walked beside them with wide eyes, his curly brown hair catching the artificial lights of the meeting dome. He wore a simple blue jumpsuit that marked him as a civilian dependent, and carried a small tablet where he'd been sketching pictures of what he imagined the aliens might look like. The meeting dome stretched before them like a massive greenhouse, its transparent walls offering a panoramic view of the surrounding Swiss mountains. In the center stood a raised platform where the Zephyrian delegation waited. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she got her first clear look at humanity's alien visitors. The Zephyrians stood nearly 3 meters tall, their bodies covered in scales that shifted between deep purple and silver, depending on the angle of light. Their faces were elongated and angular, with large eyes that held an unsettling intelligence. Most striking were their movements, fluid and predatory like great cats stalking prey. They wore elaborate robes that seemed to be made from some kind of living metal, constantly shifting and reforming into new patterns. "Impressive," whispered Dr. Kim. Their body language suggests they're apex predators on their world. The lead Zephyrian stepped forward, his scales brightening to a more aggressive purple hue. When he spoke, his voice carried through translation devices with a deep, resonant tone that seemed designed to intimidate. "I am Vextar, High Commander of the Zephyrian Fleet. We have traveled far to meet with your species, humans." His gaze swept over the small human delegation with obvious disdain. "We understand you wish to join the Galactic Council, but first you must demonstrate that you understand your place in the natural order." Elena stepped forward, keeping her voice steady despite the alien's imposing presence. "I am Captain Elena Rodriguez, representing the United Earth Government. We're honored by your visit and look forward to peaceful relations between our peoples." Vextar's expression, if it could be called that, seemed amused. "Peaceful relations, yes. But first you must see why the Zephyrians rule over 17 systems, while you humans have barely left your single world." He gestured to his companions. "We have brought something to demonstrate the natural hierarchy that exists in the galaxy. Consider it an education." 2 smaller Zephyrians moved forward, carrying what appeared to be a large, ornate container made of the same living metal as their robes. The container pulsed with a rhythmic light, and something moved within it, something large. "For 3,000 years, Vextar continued, our species has been served by the great serpents of Zephyr Prime. These creatures are the apex predators of our world, beings of such terror and magnificence that lesser species flee at the mere sight of them. Even we Zephyrians, with all our advanced technology and warrior culture, treat these beasts with the utmost respect and fear." The container began to open with a series of mechanical clicks and hisses. Steam rose from within, carrying an alien scent that made several humans instinctively step backward. Elena felt her hand move toward her sidearm before she caught herself. This was supposed to be a peaceful meeting. Throughout the galaxy, Vextar's voice grew more dramatic. Civilized species have learned to recognize and respect power when they see it. Today, young humans, you will witness the unleashing of a creature so terrible, so magnificent, that it will teach you proper humility before your betters. The container opened fully, revealing its contents. Inside, coiled like a living rope, was indeed a serpent, but one unlike anything from Earth. It was easily 4 meters long, with scales that seemed to absorb light itself, creating patches of absolute darkness along its body. Its head was broader than a human torso, with eyes like burning coals and fangs that dripped with some kind of luminescent venom. Dr. Kim gasped and instinctively moved to shield young Tommy, but the boy had already pushed forward, his eyes lighting up with curiosity rather than fear. The other humans took defensive positions, hands moving to weapons despite the diplomatic protocols. The great serpent slowly raised its massive head, surveying the humans with ancient intelligence. Its forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air, and its coal-red eyes fixed on the small group of humans. The Zephyrians watched expectantly, clearly anticipating screams, panic, or perhaps humans fleeing in terror. What they got instead was 12-year-old Tommy Martinez pushing past the adults, his tablet clutched in his hands and his face bright with excitement. "Oh, wow," Tommy exclaimed, completely oblivious to the deadly predator before him. "Is that really an alien snake?" "It's incredible. Look at those scales. And the way its eyes glow, that's bioluminescence, right, Dr. Kim?" The great serpent's head tilted slightly as if puzzled by this small human's reaction. The Zephyrians exchanged glances, their scales shifting to confused patterns of color. This was clearly not the response they had expected. Vextar's voice carried a note of uncertainty for the first time. "Human child, do you not understand what you are seeing? This is death incarnate, a creature that has devoured hundreds of beings across the galaxy." Tommy looked up at the towering alien commander, with the kind of patient expression that only children can manage when explaining something obvious to adults. "Well, yeah, it's obviously a predator, but it's also beautiful. We have snakes on Earth too, you know. Some of them are really dangerous, but they're still amazing creatures." The silence in the dome was deafening. Even the great serpent seemed frozen, its burning eyes fixed on the small human boy who showed no fear whatsoever. Tommy had moved closer to the container, completely ignoring the adults who were frantically trying to motion him back to safety. "Tommy, get back here right now," Commander Park hissed, his hand hovering over his weapon. But the boy was already crouching down near the serpent's container, studying the creature with the intense focus that only children could muster. "Look at the muscle structure," Tommy said, pulling out his tablet to take pictures. "It's way more developed than Earth snakes. I bet it can move incredibly fast when it wants to. And those heat-sensing pits near its nose, they're like our pit vipers but so much more advanced." The Zephyrian delegation exchanged increasingly agitated glances. Vextar's scales had shifted to a deep red color that Dr. Kim's xenobiology training told her indicated extreme confusion or distress. The High Commander stepped forward, his voice booming across the dome. "Child, you do not comprehend the danger you face. This creature has slain warriors 3 times your size. It has brought terror to civilizations across 17 star systems." Tommy looked up from his tablet, blinking with the kind of innocent confusion that made adults realize they might be missing something obvious. "But why would it hurt me? I'm not threatening it or invading its territory. I'm just looking." He turned back to the serpent, which had lowered its great head closer to the boy. Its forked tongue flicked out repeatedly, as if trying to understand this strange small creature that refused to show proper fear. "Besides," Tommy continued conversationally, "if you guys have been keeping it in that container, it's probably stressed and confused. Being transported across space can't be comfortable for any animal. You're basically taking it away from everything familiar and showing it off to strangers. Of course it would be defensive." The serpent's behavior was indeed puzzling the Zephyrians. Instead of rearing up in an aggressive display or preparing to strike, it seemed almost curious about the human child. Its massive head swayed slightly, following Tommy's movements as he circled the container to get different angles for his pictures. Dr. Kim found her scientific curiosity overriding her protective instincts. "Tommy's actually making sense," she said quietly to Captain Rodriguez. "Look at the creature's body language. It's not in attack posture at all. If anything, it seems confused by Tommy's lack of fear response. Vextar's translator crackled with what sounded like frustrated clicking sounds before his words came through. This is not how lesser species should react. Every intelligent being we have encountered shows proper respect and terror when faced with the great serpents. Well, maybe the problem is calling other species lesser, Tommy said matter-of-factly, still focused on his tablet. I mean, just because something is scary doesn't make it better than everything else. And just because something isn't scary doesn't make it worse. He looked up at Vextar with the kind of direct honesty that adults had long since learned to suppress. On Earth, we have lots of really dangerous animals. Sharks, tigers, crocodiles, some spiders and snakes that can kill you with one bite. But we don't worship them or think they're better than us. We just respect them and try to understand them. The boy turned back to the serpent, which had now lowered its head almost to ground level, bringing its enormous eyes close to Tommy's face. Any adult would have been paralyzed with terror, but Tommy simply continued his examination. See, this guy isn't evil or superior, Tommy explained, as if giving a nature documentary. He's just a really successful predator who's probably homesick and confused. His body language says he's more curious than aggressive right now. As if to prove Tommy's point, the great serpent extended its tongue toward the boy, stopping just short of touching him. The massive creature seemed to be trying to understand this small being that refused to flee or show submission. Fascinating, Dr. Kim breathed. The creature's stress hormones appear to be decreasing. Tommy's calm behavior is actually having a pacifying effect. The Zephyrian delegation was in obvious disarray. Their carefully planned demonstration of superiority was crumbling before their eyes. The creature they had presented as the ultimate expression of natural dominance was acting more like a confused pet than a terrifying monster. This cannot be, muttered one of the smaller Zephyrians in their own language, though the translation devices picked it up. The great serpents inspire fear in all beings. It is the natural order. Tommy overheard this and looked puzzled. Why would you want everything to be afraid of you? That sounds really lonely. On Earth, the smartest animals are usually the ones that cooperate and help each other, not the ones that just scare everyone. He gestured toward the serpent, which was now resting its great head on the edge of its container, apparently content to watch the humans. Like, this guy is obviously super intelligent. Look at how he's studying us. He's probably learned a dozen things about humans just by watching how we move and react. But if everyone just runs away screaming, he never gets to learn anything new or make any friends. Captain Rodriguez found herself stepping forward, her diplomatic training finally catching up with the situation. Commander Vextar, perhaps we should discuss what superiority actually means. Your serpent is certainly impressive, but I'm beginning to think our species might have different ideas about what makes one civilization advanced. The great serpent chose that moment to do something that shocked everyone present. It made a sound. Not the hiss or roar that everyone expected, but a low, almost musical humming that resonated through the dome. Tommy's face lit up with delight. He's trying to communicate, the boy exclaimed. That's not a threat sound at all. That's more like a whale song, or maybe how dolphins talk to each other. Dr. Kim was frantically taking readings on her instruments. The frequency is remarkably complex, she reported. There are harmonic patterns here that suggest sophisticated acoustic communication. Tommy had pulled out his tablet and was playing back recordings of various Earth animals. When he played a recording of humpback whale songs, the serpent's humming changed, seeming to respond to the different tones and frequencies. He likes music, Tommy announced with the confidence of a 12-year-old who had just made a groundbreaking discovery. You guys have been treating him like a weapon, but he's actually trying to talk to people. No wonder he gets aggressive when everyone just screams and runs away. The Zephyrian delegation stood in stunned silence as their ultimate symbol of dominance engaged in what appeared to be an interspecies musical conversation with a human child. Everything they thought they knew about natural hierarchy and the proper order of the galaxy was being challenged by a boy with a tablet and an endless curiosity about the world around him. Vextar's scales had shifted through several color patterns before, settling on a pale blue that Dr. Kim suspected indicated deep confusion or possibly even embarrassment. The High Commander's voice, when it finally came, was much quieter than before. Your young seem to possess unusual courage. Tommy looked up from his impromptu concert with the alien serpent. It's not courage, he said simply. It's just, why would I be scared of something that hasn't done anything to hurt me? Fear should be about real danger, not just about things being different or big or strange looking. The musical exchange between Tommy and the alien serpent continued for several minutes, with the creature responding to different sounds from the boy's tablet, with increasingly complex harmonic patterns. The other humans watched in amazement while the Zephyrian delegation grew more agitated with each passing moment. Finally, Vextar stepped forward, his scales now displaying rapid color shifts that suggested extreme distress. Enough! This is not how the demonstration was meant to proceed. The Great Serpent is supposed to demonstrate the natural dominance that we Zephyrians represent throughout the galaxy. Tommy looked up from his tablet, genuinely confused. But why would you want to dominance things? That seems like it would make everything harder. Harder? Vextar's voice cracked slightly through the translator. We are the apex predators of the galaxy. We rule 17 systems through strength and fear. Yeah, but ruling through fear sounds exhausting, Tommy said with the practical logic that only children seem to possess. I mean, if everyone's afraid of you, they're not really helping you because they want to. They're just doing what you say because they're scared. That means you have to spend all your time watching them and making sure they stay scared, right? Dr. Kim found herself nodding along with the boy's reasoning. He has a point, Commander Vextar. Fear-based leadership requires constant maintenance. It's actually a very inefficient form of social organization. The serpent had moved closer to Tommy, its massive head now resting on the ground beside the boy. What had started as a demonstration of terror had transformed into something resembling a nature documentary, with Tommy providing running commentary about the creature's behavior and biology. Look at his eye structure, Tommy said, gently pointing toward the serpent's face while staying careful not to make any sudden movements. The pupils can dilate independently, which probably means he can track multiple targets at once. That's amazing adaptation for a predator. But see how calm his breathing is? He's not stressed anymore. He was probably just scared of being in a new place with lots of strangers. Captain Rodriguez seized the moment to advance their diplomatic position. Commander Vextar, perhaps we could discuss what our species might learn from each other, rather than focusing on dominance hierarchies. But Vextar was clearly struggling with concepts that challenged everything his species believed about galactic civilization. You do not understand. The strong rule the weak. This is the natural order that has governed the galaxy for millennia. Species prove their worth through demonstrations of power. But what if there are different kinds of strength? Tommy asked, still focused on his new friend. Like, this serpent guy is physically really powerful, but he's also smart enough to learn new songs and try to communicate with species he's never met before. That's a different kind of strength than just being scary. He looked up at the towering aliens with the fearless curiosity that had gotten him into trouble his entire short life. And you guys are obviously super advanced technologically. You built spaceships that can travel between stars and translation devices that let us talk to each other. But humans are good at different things, such as... Vextar's tone suggested he expected to be amused by whatever primitive accomplishments these humans might claim. Tommy gestured around the dome, his mind working at the lightning speed that had always impressed his teachers. Well, like, we figured out how to make friends with dangerous animals. On Earth, we domesticated wolves and turned them into dogs that help us hunt and protect us and just hang out with us because they want to. We made friends with horses so we could travel faster. We learned to work with dolphins and whales and even some sharks. Dr. Kim picked up the thread, her scientific training allowing her to articulate what Tommy was intuiting. Humans excel at forming cooperative relationships across species barriers. It's actually one of our defining characteristics as a species. We don't rule through fear, Captain Rodriguez added. We've learned that cooperation and mutual benefit create much stronger and more stable relationships than dominance. The serpent chose that moment to do something that stopped all conversation. Moving with the fluid grace that marked it as an apex predator, it gently extended its massive head toward Tommy. The boy, showing either incredible bravery or incredible stupidity, reached out and actually touched the creature's snout. The dome fell silent except for the soft humming sound the serpent was making, a sound that had grown more complex and musical as its interaction with Tommy continued. The creature's eyes closed partially, displaying what any Earth animal behaviorist would recognize as contentment. Impossible, whispered one of the smaller Zephyrians. The great serpents do not permit touch from any being, not even us. They are solitary predators who tolerate no contact. Maybe they're only solitary because no one ever tried to be friends with them, Tommy suggested gently, his hand still resting on the serpent's snout. I mean, If everyone who met you was either trying to control you or running away screaming, you'd probably become antisocial too. The serpent's humming had now taken on harmonies that seemed to incorporate elements from the earth animal sounds Tommy had played earlier. It was creating a song that blended alien and terrestrial elements into something entirely new. Vextar stared at this impossible scene, a human child casually petting the most feared predator in the known galaxy, while the creature sang what could only be described as a happy song. Everything his species believed about strength, dominance, and the natural order was crumbling before his eyes. "This changes nothing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Physical power still determines the hierarchy of species. Your child shows unusual fearlessness, but humans remain weak compared to true apex predators." Tommy looked up with the expression he usually wore when adults said something particularly silly. "But I'm not trying to be stronger than him," he said, nodding toward the serpent. "I'm trying to be friends with him. Why would I want to fight something this cool when I could try to understand it instead?" Commander Park, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange, stepped forward. "Commander Vextar, with respect, I think you might be operating under some misconceptions about human nature." "Explain." Park's military bearing made his words carry additional weight. "Humans don't become powerful by dominating other species. We become powerful by learning to work with them. We've survived and thrived not because we're the strongest or fastest or most individually dangerous, but because we're really good at making alliances. Even with our own predators," Dr. Kim added. "We've learned to coexist with creatures that could easily kill us individually. We study them, respect them, and find ways to benefit both species." Tommy was now sitting cross-legged beside the serpent's container, sketching the creature in his tablet while it continued its musical humming. The scene looked like a boy drawing his pet dog, except the pet was a 4-meter alien predator that supposedly terrorized galactic civilizations. "The funny thing is," Tommy said thoughtfully, not looking up from his drawing, "I bet he's been lonely for a really long time. Predators are usually smart, and smart animals need social interaction or they get depressed. If everyone's afraid of him, he never gets to just hang out and be himself." The serpent's head moved closer to Tommy's tablet, apparently interested in watching the drawing process. Its large eyes tracked the boy's stylus movements with obvious intelligence. "He wants to see what I'm drawing," Tommy announced with delight. "Look, he's actually posing for me now." Indeed, the great serpent had shifted its position slightly, angling its head to show its profile to the boy. The gesture was so clearly deliberate that even the Zephyrians couldn't pretend it was coincidental. "Your species," Vextar said slowly, his scales now a pale, confused blue, "does not react as others do." "Well, no," Tommy agreed cheerfully. "But that's not because we're better or worse than anyone else. It's just because we do things differently. Maybe instead of trying to figure out who's in charge, we could try to figure out how to help each other." The transformation in the dome's atmosphere was palpable. What had begun as a carefully orchestrated demonstration of alien superiority had evolved into something entirely unexpected. The great serpent was now actively participating in what could only be described as an art session, shifting positions as Tommy sketched different angles and responding to the boy's quiet commentary with increasingly complex musical responses. Dr. Kim was discreetly recording everything on her instruments, her xenobiology training telling her that she was witnessing something unprecedented in interspecies contact. "Captain," she whispered to Rodriguez, "the creature's stress hormones have dropped to baseline levels. Its brainwave patterns suggest it's experiencing something analogous to what we might call contentment, or even joy." Vextar overheard this and stepped closer, his scales cycling through colors that suggested deep confusion. "That cannot be accurate. The great serpents know only hunger, territoriality, and the drive to dominate. They are incapable of joy. Maybe they just never had a reason to be joyful before," Tommy suggested without looking up from his tablet. He had moved on to a new sketch, this one showing the serpent not as a fearsome predator but as the intelligent, curious creature he was observing. "I mean, if your whole life was about being scary and dangerous, you probably wouldn't have much fun either." The serpent's humming had evolved into something that included rhythm patterns, as if it was learning the concept of music from Tommy's earlier recordings. It would hum a phrase, pause as if listening to something only it could hear, then repeat the phrase with subtle variations. It's composing, Dr. Kim breathed. The creature is actually composing original music. One of the smaller Zephyrians, whose scales had been shifting between purple and silver in obvious distress, finally spoke up. High Commander, this contradicts everything we know about the great serpents. They have never displayed such behavior with any species, including our own. Vextar's response was sharp with frustration. Because other species respond appropriately. They show fear and submission, which maintains the proper order. This human child's behavior is unnatural. Or maybe it's more natural than you think, Captain Rodriguez suggested diplomatically. Tommy's reaction is actually quite typical for human children when they encounter new animals. Curiosity before fear is how we've learned to coexist with thousands of different species on our planet. Tommy had finished his sketch and was now showing it to the serpent, holding the tablet where the creature could see the screen. The serpent's great head tilted as it studied the image, its eyes focusing with obvious intelligence on the drawing that depicted it in a peaceful, almost majestic pose. See, you're really beautiful when you're not trying to be scary, Tommy told the creature conversationally. I drew you singing because that's when you look happiest. The serpent's response was immediate and startling. It lifted its head and produced a series of sounds that were clearly different from its previous humming. More structured, more intentional. Dr. Kim's instruments went wild trying to analyze the complex acoustic patterns. That's not random noise, she reported excitedly. There are grammatical structures in those sounds. Repeating patterns, variations on themes. I think it's trying to say something specific. Tommy was listening intently, his head tilted with concentration. I think he likes the picture, he announced. The sounds got more complex right after I showed it to him, and he's looking back and forth between me and the drawing. Commander Park, who had been watching the Zephyrian delegation carefully, stepped forward. Commander Vextar, I have to ask, in all your interactions with this creature's species, have you ever tried simply talking to them, without the context of dominance or submission? The question clearly caught Vextar off guard. His scales shifted to a deep red that Dr. Kim was beginning to recognize as the Zephyrian equivalent of embarrassment. The great serpents are tools of war and symbols of power. One does not talk to such creatures. But maybe that's the problem, Tommy said, looking up from where he was now sitting comfortably beside the serpent's container. The massive predator had coiled its body in a relaxed position, keeping its head near the boy but making no threatening moves. I mean, if you only see him as a weapon, you miss all the cool stuff about who he really is. It is not a who, Vextar protested, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. It is a creature of instinct and predation. The serpent chose that moment to demonstrate just how wrong that assessment was. Moving with deliberate care, it extended its tail toward Tommy's dropped stylus, gently nudging the drawing implement back toward the boy's hand. The gesture was so clearly intentional, so obviously helpful, that even the most skeptical observer couldn't dismiss it as instinct. He wants me to keep drawing, Tommy said with delight, picking up the stylus. That's really thoughtful of him. Dr. Kim was frantically taking notes. Deliberate tool manipulation to facilitate continued social interaction. That's sophisticated behavioral planning, not instinct. The smaller Zephyrians were now openly staring at their great serpent, their scales displaying patterns that suggested they were re-evaluating everything they thought they knew. One of them addressed Vextar in their own language, but the translation devices picked up the conversation. High Commander, if the creature possesses such intelligence, have we been misusing them? Vextar's response was immediate and defensive. The great serpents serve the glory of the Zephyrian Empire. They are instruments of our rightful dominance. But what if they could be partners instead of instruments? Captain Rodriguez asked gently. What if cooperation could achieve more than dominance? Tommy was sketching again, this time drawing what appeared to be the serpent interacting with various other creatures in peaceful scenarios. The serpent watched with obvious fascination, occasionally humming softly when Tommy captured a particularly appealing pose or expression. You know what would be really cool? Tommy said suddenly. If he could meet some earth animals. I bet he'd get along great with whales. They're both really smart, and they both like making music. The idea seemed to energize the serpent, whose humming took on excited overtones. It began moving its head in rhythmic patterns that matched its vocalizations, creating what could only be described as a dance. He likes that idea, Tommy announced. Look, he's dancing about it. The sight of the galaxy's most feared predator performing what was unmistakably a happy dance was too much for the Zephyrian delegation. Their carefully constructed worldview was crumbling with each passing moment. "This is impossible," Vextar muttered, but he was watching the Serpent's performance with the same fascination as everyone else. The great Serpents do not dance. Maybe they just never had music worth dancing to before, Tommy suggested. He had pulled up another file on his tablet, this time a recording of Earth's greatest symphony orchestras. When the music began playing, the Serpent's response was immediate and enthusiastic. The creature began moving its entire body in time with the music, its coils flowing in patterns that matched the rhythm and melody, its vocalizations harmonized with the orchestral pieces, creating an impromptu interspecies concert that filled the dome with unprecedented beauty. "This changes everything," whispered Dr. Kim. "If this creature represents the norm for its species, then the Zephyrians have been fundamentally misunderstanding their nature for thousands of years." But it was Tommy who voiced the most important observation of all. Looking up at Vextar with the directness that only children could manage, he asked, "If you've been making them be scary and mean for thousands of years, but they're actually this creative and musical and smart, doesn't that mean you've been hurting them? And doesn't that mean they might be mad at you?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. For the first time since the demonstration began, the great Serpent stopped its musical performance and turned its burning gaze toward the Zephyrian delegation. The look in its ancient eyes was no longer that of a simple predator. It was the gaze of an intelligent being that had just realized it had been enslaved for millennia. Container was one that would be remembered in galactic history. Moving with fluid grace that spoke of millennia of controlled power, the creature extended to its full 4-meter length, then carefully coiled itself in a position that brought its head level with Tommy while keeping the rest of its body relaxed and non-threatening. The humans watched in fascination, while the Zephyrians struggled with the reality of seeing their ultimate symbol of power choosing peaceful interaction over dominance. The Serpent's first act of freedom was to gently touch Tommy's outstretched hand with the tip of its snout, a gesture so tender that it brought tears to Dr. Kim's eyes. "He's saying thank you," Tommy said confidently, though how he could interpret the Serpent's intentions was unclear to the adults, not just to me, but to all of us. "He's been waiting his whole life for someone to see him as more than just a weapon." The Serpent began to explore the dome with obvious curiosity, moving in slow, deliberate patterns that allowed everyone to observe its grace and intelligence. It approached each human in turn, studying them with ancient eyes that held no trace of aggression, only curiosity and what might have been gratitude. When it reached Dr. Kim, the creature paused and produced a series of complex vocalizations while gesturing toward her instruments. The xenobiologist stared in amazement as she realized what was happening. "It's asking about my equipment," she breathed. "It wants to understand how I've been monitoring its biological functions. It's scientifically curious." The Serpent's interaction with Commander Park was equally revealing. Rather than viewing the military officer as a threat, it seemed to recognize his role as a protector and vocalized what sounded like respectful acknowledgement of a fellow guardian. But it was the creature's approach to Captain Rodriguez that provided the most insight into its intelligence. The Serpent studied her for a long moment, then began producing vocalizations that the translator struggled to interpret before settling on. "Leader who speaks for the small ones. You carry the weight of many choices." Rodriguez felt a chill of recognition. The creature had somehow identified her role and the burden of responsibility she carried for humanity's first contact with alien species. "You understand more than anyone realized, don't you?" she said softly. The Serpent's response was a complex musical phrase that seemed to carry undertones of sadness and hope in equal measure. Then it turned back to the Zephyrian delegation, and its entire demeanor changed. The creature's approach to its former captors was not aggressive, but it was definitely different from its interactions with the humans. There was a weight to its movements, a gravity that spoke of millennia of suppressed intelligence and creativity, forced into the role of a mere weapon. Vextar stood frozen as the great Serpent approached him. When the creature began to vocalize, the sounds were unmistakably in Old Zephyrian, but the complexity and sophistication of the language patterns were far beyond what any animal should have been capable of producing. Dr. Kim's instruments were working overtime to analyze the linguistic structures. "This is incredible," she reported. "The creature isn't just speaking Old Zephyrian, it's speaking it at a level that suggests formal education and sophisticated philosophical understanding." The smaller Zephyrian who had spoken earlier stepped forward hesitantly. "High Commander, it is speaking of ancient concepts that only our greatest scholars understand. Concepts of justice, freedom, and the nature of sapient rights." Tommy had moved closer to listen, his tablet ready to record this historic moment. "What's he saying exactly?" The Zephyrian scales shifted to deep blue patterns that indicated profound emotional distress. It is reciting the codes of sapient rights that our own ancestors established thousands of years ago. The same codes that should have protected it from enslavement. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Not only had the Zephyrians enslaved an intelligent species, but they had violated their own ancient ethical principles in doing so. The Serpent had somehow learned these principles and was now using them to make its case for freedom and recognition. Vextar's response was barely audible. "We have become what our ancestors would have considered monsters." The Serpent paused in its recitation and looked directly at the High Commander. Its next vocalization was softer, carrying what sounded like pity rather than anger. The translation came through as, "Understanding brings the possibility of redemption." Tommy looked up from his tablet with the expression he wore when adults were finally starting to understand something important. "See, he's not angry anymore. He just wants you to do better." Dr. Kim was studying her readings with growing excitement. "Captain, I think the creature is offering to help them. Its biochemical markers suggest it's willing to work with the Zephyrians to reform their treatment of its species." The Serpent confirmed this interpretation by moving to the center of the dome and beginning what could only be described as a presentation, using a combination of vocalizations, gestures, and what appeared to be interpretive movement. It began to communicate a complex plan. "It's showing us how the Serpents could be partners instead of slaves," Tommy translated, his artistic eye helping him interpret the creature's visual communication. "Look, it's demonstrating different roles they could play in society. As teachers, explorers, artists, even as protectors who choose to protect rather than being forced to fight." The presentation was sophisticated, beyond anything the Zephyrians had imagined possible from their weapons. The Serpent demonstrated concepts of education, showing how its species could share their ancient knowledge with younger Zephyrians. It showed artistic collaboration, combining its musical abilities with hypothetical Zephyrian instruments. Most importantly, it showed voluntary cooperation, where Serpents would choose to work with other species based on mutual benefit rather than coercion. "This changes everything," whispered one of the smaller Zephyrians. "If the great Serpents could be partners rather than tools, our entire empire could be transformed." But it was the Serpent's final demonstration that brought the full weight of the situation home. Moving with deliberate ceremony, it approached Tommy and began a complex vocal pattern that incorporated elements of earth music it had learned. Old Zephyrian ceremonial language and its own species' musical tradition. The result was a composition that bridged three completely different forms of communication into something beautiful and unified. "It's composing a song about hope," Tommy said, tears streaming down his face as he realized what he was witnessing, about different species learning to understand each other and work together, about choosing friendship over fear. The Serpent's song grew in complexity as it incorporated sounds from the dome itself. The hum of the life support systems, the whisper of air circulation, even the subtle electronic sounds from Dr. Kim's instruments. It was creating a symphony of cooperation that included every element of their shared environment. When the song reached its crescendo, the Serpent did something that shocked everyone present. It began to divide its vocalizations into harmonies, essentially singing a duet with itself while encouraging others to join in. Tommy immediately began humming along, his young voice adding a human element to the interspecies composition. Dr. Kim found herself adding a harmony line, her scientific training helping her understand the mathematical relationships in the Serpent's musical structure. Commander Park, despite his military bearing, began tapping out a rhythm on his equipment that complemented the song's beat. Even Captain Rodriguez found herself swept up in the moment, adding her voice to what was becoming the first truly interspecies musical collaboration in galactic history. The Zephyrians stood frozen for a moment. Then the smaller one who had been translating, began to add Zephyrian musical elements to the composition. One by one, the others joined in, until even Vextar was contributing to the unprecedented symphony. When the song finally ended, the dome fell into a silence that felt sacred. The great serpent looked around at all the beings who had joined in its composition, and its expression could only be described as profoundly grateful. Tommy broke the silence with the straightforward honesty that had marked the entire encounter. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And it happened because we all chose to listen to each other instead of being afraid." The serpent moved close to Tommy and produced a soft, affectionate sound before turning to address the entire assembly. Its next vocalization was complex and formal, clearly directed at both humans and Zephyrians alike. Dr. Kim's translator worked for several seconds before providing the interpretation. "Let this moment mark the beginning of a new age, where sapient beings choose understanding over dominance, cooperation over conquest, and hope over fear." Vextar stepped forward. His scales now settled into patterns that suggested humility and determination. "Great One, we accept your wisdom. The Zephyrian Empire will undergo fundamental changes to reflect the rights and dignity of your species." The serpent's response was immediate and positive, but it also gestured toward Tommy before vocalizing again. "It wants the human child to be part of the transition process," the translator announced. "It believes humanity's natural ability to form cooperative relationships could help guide the reformation of Zephyrian society." Tommy looked up at the adults with wide eyes. Deafening. The great serpent's burning gaze remained fixed on the Zephyrian delegation, and for the first time since the demonstration began, its posture shifted into something that could be interpreted as threatening. But it wasn't the mindless aggression of a beast. It was the cold, calculating anger of an intelligent being that had just realized the truth about its situation. Vextar's scales had gone completely pale, cycling through colors so rapidly that Dr. Kim's instruments could barely track the changes. The other Zephyrians were backing away from their own creature, suddenly seeing it not as a symbol of their power, but as a potential threat to their very existence. "The great serpents serve willingly," Vextar said, but his voice lacked any conviction. "They are honored to be part of our empire's glory." Tommy looked at him with the patient expression children reserved for adults who were being particularly dense. "But did you ever ask them if they wanted to serve? I mean, really ask them, not just assume they were okay with it." The serpent's humming had stopped entirely. Instead, it was producing a new sound, a low rumbling vocalization that seemed to carry undertones of what could only be described as betrayal and anger. The creature's intelligence was becoming more apparent with each passing moment, and with that intelligence came the dawning realization of how it had been treated. Dr. Kim was monitoring the creature's biometrics with growing concern. "Captain, the serpent's stress levels are rising, but not in the way we'd expect from a simple predator. These patterns suggest complex emotional processing, grief, anger, and what might be depression." "He's sad," Tommy said simply, moving closer to the serpent despite the adult's alarmed protests. "He just figured out that his whole life has been a lie, didn't he?" The great serpent lowered its massive head toward Tommy, its burning eyes now dimmed with what was unmistakably sorrow. The boy reached out without hesitation, placing his small hand on the creature's snout in a gesture of comfort. "It's okay," Tommy said softly. "You're not alone anymore. We can help you figure out who you really are, not who they told you to be." The serpent's response was immediate, a soft, mournful sound that resonated through the dome like a lament. It was the sound of a being mourning for a life it had never been allowed to live. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, her diplomatic training finally catching up with the implications of what they were witnessing. "Commander Vextar, we need to discuss the ethical implications of what you've just revealed. If these creatures are intelligent beings capable of choice, then your empire has been engaged in slavery, not animal husbandry. That is not..." Vextar's translator crackled as he struggled with concepts that challenged the foundation of his entire civilization. "The great serpents are not... They cannot be... They can be whatever they choose to be," Tommy interrupted, his hand still resting comfortingly on the serpent's head. "Just like people, just like any intelligent creature." One of the smaller Zephyrians, whose scales had settled into a pattern of deep purple and silver, stepped forward hesitantly. High Commander, perhaps we should consider the possibility that our understanding of the great serpents has been incomplete. The serpent turned its attention to this Zephyrian, and its expression, if a serpent could be said to have expressions, was one of guarded hope. It began to vocalize again, but this time the sounds were clearly directed at the smaller alien, structured and purposeful in a way that suggested language. Dr. Kim's instruments went wild. Those are definitely linguistic patterns. The creature is trying to communicate with them in what might be their own language. Tommy looked up excitedly. He's trying to talk to them. He probably knows their language from listening to them all these years. But they never bothered to listen back. The smaller Zephyrian was staring at the serpent in shock. It is speaking Old Zephyrian, the ancient tongue that only our historians know. How could it possibly be? Because he's been listening to you for thousands of years, Tommy said with the matter-of-fact tone that made adults realize children often saw things more clearly than they did. He's probably smarter than most of you, but you never gave him a chance to show it because you only wanted him to be scary. The serpent continued its linguistic display, switching between what sounded like Old Zephyrian and its own musical language, sometimes combining the two in complex patterns that suggested bilingual thought processes. Vextar was now openly staring at the creature that his species had used as a weapon for millennia. If what you suggest is true, then we have committed a grave error. Not just an error, Commander Park said grimly. A crime. If these beings are sapient, then you've been enslaving an entire species for thousands of years. The weight of this realization seemed to hit the Zephyrian delegation all at once. Their scales shifted to patterns that Dr. Kim was beginning to understand indicated shame and horror. The smaller Zephyrians were looking at their High Commander with expressions that suggested their entire worldview was crumbling. But it was Tommy who provided the path forward. The good news is that you can fix it, he said, still comforting the serpent. You can't change what happened before, but you can change what happens next. How? Vextar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Start by apologizing, Tommy suggested with the straightforward logic of childhood. Then ask him what he wants to do with his life. Give him choices. Let him be free to be himself. The serpent had been following this conversation intently, its head moving between speakers as if tracking a complex discussion. When Tommy mentioned choices and freedom, the creature's eyes brightened noticeably, and it produced a sound that could only be described as hopeful. Dr. Kim looked up from her instruments with amazement. The creature's biochemistry is shifting again. Those hope markers are off the charts. It understands what we're discussing. Vextar approached the serpent slowly, his own movements uncertain for the first time since the humans had met him. When he was close enough to look directly into the creature's burning eyes, he spoke in what the translator indicated was formal, ceremonial Zephyrian. Great One, we have done you a terrible wrong. We ask for your forgiveness and offer you freedom to choose your own path. The serpent's response was immediate and complex, a vocalization that combined old Zephyrian phrases with its own musical language and patterns that seemed to express both forgiveness and a desire for change. The creature then turned to Tommy and produced the soft humming sound that had marked their first positive interaction. He forgives you, Tommy translated confidently, but he wants to explore. He wants to learn about other worlds and other species. He wants to make music and art and maybe teach other serpents that they don't have to be weapons either. The implications of this hit everyone simultaneously. If one serpent could make this transformation, then potentially every member of their species could be freed from millennia of enforced servitude. There are thousands of great serpents throughout our empire, one of the smaller Zephyrians said quietly. If they are all truly sapient beings who have been enslaved, then you have the opportunity to become the species that liberated them instead of the species that enslaved them, Captain Rodriguez said diplomatically. History will remember how you choose to handle this revelation. Tommy was back to sketching, this time drawing pictures of the serpent exploring different worlds, meeting various alien species, creating art and music. The creature watched with obvious fascination, occasionally suggesting changes through gesture or vocalization. You know what would be really cool? Tommy said suddenly. If he came to Earth for a while, we have lots of different environments he could explore, and tons of animals that would love to meet him. Plus, our musicians would probably love to collaborate with him. The serpent's enthusiasm for this idea was unmistakable. Its entire body language shifted to express excitement. and it began producing rapid-fire vocalizations that sounded like questions. "He wants to know about Earth's oceans," Dr. Kim interpreted from her instruments. "And your musical instruments." "And something about whales?" "I told him about whales earlier," Tommy explained. "They're really smart and they sing too. I bet they'd be great friends." Vextar was watching this exchange with something approaching wonder. In all our history, no species has ever treated the great serpents as people, as individuals with their own desires and dreams. Well, that's probably because most species were too busy being scared to get to know them, Tommy pointed out. Fear makes it hard to see who someone really is inside. The serpent had moved closer to the edge of its container, clearly wanting to interact more directly with the humans. Its posture was entirely peaceful, curious rather than threatening. Could he come out of there?" Tommy asked. "I mean, if he promises not to hurt anyone? He looks really cramped." The request sent new waves of alarm through the Zephyrian delegation, but the serpent was already responding. It vocalized what sounded like a solemn promise, then began to slowly, carefully emerge from its container. Every movement was deliberate and peaceful, designed to show that it posed no threat to anyone present. For the first time in thousands of years, one of the galaxy's most feared predators was free to move as it chose, and its choice was to approach a 12-year-old human bee. Was already evident across 17 star systems. The Great Liberation, as historians were calling it, had proceeded far more smoothly than anyone had dared hope, largely due to an unlikely partnership between a 12-year-old human boy and the most feared predators in the known galaxy. Tommy Martinez stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Harmony, watching as another transport ship arrived at the newly established Serpent Integration Center on Kepler Station. Through the massive viewport, he could see graceful forms emerging from the transport, 3 more of the great serpents, no longer confined to cramped containers but traveling in specially designed habitats that allowed them to move freely during their journey to freedom. "That makes 47 this week," said Sisath, the serpent who had started it all. The great creature had chosen to remain with the human diplomatic mission, serving as both translator and advocate for his species. His mastery of human languages had grown remarkably, though he still preferred to communicate through the musical vocalizations that Tommy had learned to understand with startling accuracy. Dr. Kim looked up from her research station, where she was compiling data from the ongoing integration process. The psychological recovery rates continued to exceed our projections. Once the serpents understand they have choices, the transformation in their behavior and mental health is dramatic. The integration process had revealed the true scope of what the Zephyrians had unknowingly done to an entire species. Generations of serpents had been raised believing their only purpose was to serve as weapons and symbols of terror. Many had developed what could only be described as learned helplessness, unable to imagine any existence beyond their prescribed roles. But with patience, compassion, and Tommy's remarkable gift for interspecies communication, they were rediscovering their true nature. The serpents, it turned out, were naturally creative, highly intelligent beings with complex social structures and a deep appreciation for art, music, and philosophy. "The Zephyrian Council meeting went well today," Captain Rodriguez reported as she entered the observation lounge. "They've officially ratified the Serpent Rights Accords and agreed to establish the Cultural Exchange Program." Tommy grinned, his tablet as always in his hands, now filled with hundreds of sketches and recordings from his work with the liberated serpents. "That's great. Did they approve the education initiative too?" "Unanimously," Rodriguez confirmed. "Every serpent will have access to full educational opportunities, and they'll be able to choose their own career paths. Some want to continue working with the Zephyrians as partners. Others are interested in exploration, and quite a few want to pursue artistic endeavors." Sisath's eyes brightened with the warm glow that Tommy had learned indicated happiness. "My cousin Viridian has expressed interest in your human concept of marine biology. She wishes to study the ocean worlds and perhaps work with your whale species." "That would be awesome," Tommy said enthusiastically. "I've been working on some communication protocols that might help whales and serpents understand each other. They're both really intelligent and they both love music." The door to the observation lounge hissed open and Vextar entered. The former High Commander's transformation had been as dramatic as any serpent's. No longer the proud, dominating figure who had arrived on Earth 6 months ago. He now served as the Zephyrian ambassador for Serpent relations, dedicated to undoing the damage his species had unknowingly inflicted. "Young Tommy," Vextar said, his scales displaying the warm blue patterns that had become his default emotional state since the revelation. "The Serpent Council has requested your presence at tomorrow's ceremony." "Which ceremony?" Tommy asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "The formal establishment of the first serpent-governed world," Dr. Kim explained. "They're granting full autonomy to Thessar Prime, and the serpents will be governing themselves for the first time in millennia." Sisath's musical response conveyed profound emotion. Through months of working together, Tommy had learned to interpret the subtle variations in serpent vocalizations that expressed concepts human languages couldn't easily capture. This particular melody spoke of hope, gratitude, and the joy of a people finally coming home to themselves. "They want me to speak at the ceremony?" Tommy asked, still amazed that his role in galactic history had grown so far beyond that first chance encounter. "Not just speak," Vextar clarified. "They wish to formally recognize you as the first friend of the Serpent people. It's a new title they've created specifically for you." Tommy blushed, still uncomfortable with the attention his actions had brought him. "I just treated them like people. That's not special. That's just normal." "But that's exactly why it was special," Captain Rodriguez said gently. "In a galaxy where fear and dominance had ruled for so long, treating others with simple kindness and curiosity was revolutionary." Through the viewport, they could see more ships arriving at the station. Not just transports carrying liberated serpents, but vessels from dozens of different species who had come to witness the transformation taking place. Word of the serpent liberation had spread throughout the galaxy, inspiring other oppressed peoples and challenging established power structures everywhere. "The ripple effects continue to amaze me," Dr. Kim mused. 3 other species have already declared independence from oppressive alliances, and the Galactic Council is being forced to establish new protocols for recognizing sapient rights. Tommy was sketching the view from the observation deck, capturing the historic moment when dozens of species gathered to celebrate freedom and cooperation. Sisath watched over his shoulder, occasionally suggesting improvements or offering different perspectives on the composition. "You know what's really cool?" Tommy said as he worked. "Everyone thought the serpents were the scariest thing in the galaxy, but it turns out they're some of the kindest people I've ever met. They just needed someone to give them a chance to show who they really are." Sisath's response was a complex melody that conveyed deep affection and gratitude. Over the months, he and Tommy had developed a friendship that transcended species barriers, built on shared curiosity, creativity, and a mutual love of discovery. "The educational programs are showing remarkable results too," Dr. Kim added. "Young serpents who have never been taught to be weapons are displaying natural tendencies toward art, science, and social cooperation. It's clear that aggression was learned behavior, not an inherent trait." Commander Park joined them at the viewport, his expression thoughtful. "What strikes me most is how this all started with one simple question from a child. Why would you want everything to be afraid of you?" Sometimes the most profound insights come from the most innocent observations." Tommy looked up from his sketching, his face serious despite his youth. "I think maybe adults forget sometimes that being different doesn't mean being dangerous. And being powerful doesn't mean you have to make other people feel small." The observation lounge fell quiet as everyone contemplated the wisdom in those simple words. Through the viewport, they could see serpents moving freely through the station's corridors, no longer confined or controlled but exploring, learning, and choosing their own destinies. "The integration metrics from Earth are particularly encouraging," Dr. Kim reported. "The serpents who chose to visit our planet have adapted remarkably well. The collaboration between Sisath's pod brother and our marine research team has already yielded 3 major discoveries about deep ocean ecosystems. And the music," Tommy added excitedly. "The symphony that Sisath composed with the London Philharmonic is being performed on 12 different worlds next month. Art really does bring people together." Sisath's melodic response was filled with joy and anticipation. He had found his calling as a composer, creating works that bridge the musical traditions of different species into unified expressions of hope and cooperation. As the day shifted toward evening aboard the station, the group remained at the viewport, watching as the galaxy slowly transformed itself. Ships continued to arrive, bringing more liberated serpents and delegations from species eager to learn about humanity's approach to interspecies relations. You know, Tommy said thoughtfully, I used to think the most important thing about first contact would be the technology we could share, or the new worlds we could explore. But it turns out the most important thing is just learning to be friends. Captain Rodriguez smiled at the boy who had accidentally become humanity's greatest ambassador. That might be the most important lesson in galactic history, Tommy. Seasoth moved closer to the viewport, his great head tilted toward the stars visible beyond the station. His next vocalization was soft and contemplative, speaking of ancient dreams finally fulfilled and new possibilities stretching endlessly into the future. He says the serpents have a prophecy, Tommy translated, his understanding of his friend's musical language now nearly perfect, about a time when the children of different worlds would teach their elders to choose love over fear. He thinks maybe that time has finally come. Through the observation deck's viewport, they could see the lights of 100 different ships from dozens of species, all gathered to witness the birth of a new age in galactic civilization, an age that had begun with a 12-year-old boy who refused,